They want to call tonight, and what they will say changes everything. Psychology tricks. Sometimes the heart understands long before the mind is ready to admit the truth. Take a slow breath with me for a second. Let the day loosen its grip. Drop your shoulders. Unclench your jaw. If your chest feels heavy right now, that's not random. If a certain person just slipped into your thoughts without warning, there's a reason for that too. Tonight, someone from your past isn't at peace. This isn't nostalgia. This isn't boredom. This is regret finally outgrowing ego. Some bonds don't actually break when people walk away. They don't end, they go quiet. And silence has a way of circling back when it can't be ignored anymore. They want to call you, not for small talk, not to see how you've been. They want to say the things fear stopped them from saying back then. And when those words come out, they won't just catch you off guard. They'll rewrite the meaning of what you thought was over. Tonight feels unusual, doesn't it? There's a pressure in the air, the kind that shows up before a turning point. You try to treat it like any other night, but something inside you won't settle. Because somewhere, someone who once chose distance is wide awake, restless, replaying moments they pretended didn't matter. They disappeared without answers. They left you holding questions you were never meant to carry alone. Time has passed, life has happened, and now courage has finally shown up, late but loud. When they speak, it won't just change how you see them. It will change how you see yourself. It will change how you understand the past. Stay here. Because this isn't just a story. For some men listening right now, this moment is closer than you think. Part 1. The night they can't ignore you anymore. They didn't notice it at first, not when the evening began and not when the noise was still loud. But tonight, something is different, and you can feel it even from a distance, because distraction failed them in every familiar form, scrolling longer than usual, answering messages they barely read, letting music play without really hearing it, staying busy just to avoid stillness. Yet when the world finally slowed and the lights dimmed, you returned, not as a picture, not as a scene from the past, but as a sensation that settled in their chest and refused to move. And right now they are sitting there with their phone in their hand, staring at the screen longer than makes sense, longer than comfort allows, because your name is still saved exactly the same. Your number is still untouched, never erased, never forgotten, quietly waiting like a door they told themselves they'd never need again. And here's the part they didn't anticipate. You were the one they believed they could leave without consequence, the one they assumed would always be available, patient, unchanged, should they ever feel the urge to return. So they walked away without explanation, without clarity, without closure, telling themselves silence was easier than honesty, never pausing to calculate the cost of that silence, while you carried it alone, questioning yourself late at night, replaying conversations line by line, wondering where things shifted, wondering if you missed a signal, wondering if you should have done something differently, even when, deep down, you knew you showed up with sincerity and steadiness. And now the balance has shifted because tonight regret speaks louder than pride, and the distance they once treated lightly has weight, shape, consequence. And for the first time, they feel it pressing back, teaching them a truth that arrives late but hits hard. Walking away did not bring relief. It brought loneliness, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet kind that settles in after midnight, when there is no one left to impress and no one left to distract. And now they stand at a simple but heavy crossroads, one decision splitting the night in two: press call or carry this feeling forward indefinitely. Because if they call tonight, it won't be casual and it won't be impulsive. It will be because the truth inside them has grown too loud to ignore, because the emotional tab they thought time would erase has come due. And this is where understanding psychology tricks matters, not in a manipulative sense, but in recognizing how absence reshapes value and how silence, when chosen deliberately, forces reflection. Because female psychology responds not to words, but to emotional consistency over time. And what they are experiencing now is the delayed impact of realizing you were not easily replaceable, not because you demanded attention, but because you offered presence without conditions. And this is how to fall in love in its most honest form, not through chase or pressure, but through the space that allows someone to feel the loss clearly. And don't misunderstand this moment. Don't romanticize it. Be grounded, because this call, if it comes, is not about nostalgia. It is about recognition. It is about them finally understanding that connection is felt strongest when it is almost gone. And you must remember this: you are not waiting, you are choosing. You are not frozen in the past. You are steady in the present. And if they dial your number tonight, it is because their mind has finally aligned with their emotions, because the stories they told themselves no longer hold, because the quiet has forced them to confront what they set aside too easily. And this is where psychology tricks reveal their deeper purpose, where female psychology intersects with self-awareness, where how to fall in love becomes less about strategy and more about truth. Because real attachment forms when someone realizes what life feels like without you in it. And if the phone lights up, be calm, be measured, don't rush, don't rehearse speeches, don't chase validation, be clear, be present. Because the power in this moment comes not from what you say, but from who you have become while they were gone. And whether they call or stay silent, understand this: tonight already changed everything, because you are no longer the unanswered question. You are the answer they finally understand. And that understanding, once it arrives, cannot be undone, no matter what they choose next. Because insight, once felt, never fully leaves. And that is the quiet truth at the heart of connection, the part no one teaches, the part men only learn by living, the part that turns distance into clarity and silence into meaning, again and again, through the same psychology tricks, through the same patterns of female psychology, through the same timeless lesson of how to fall in love without losing yourself. Part 2: What they've been holding back all this time. If they call tonight, understand this first: it won't be easy for them to speak. Their voice will hesitate, not because they are confused and not because they lack words, but because they know exactly what should have been said long ago. That is the weight behind the pause. Those silences you will hear are not empty. They are heavy. They are filled with sentences that lived inside them for months, maybe years. Sentences swallowed every time they whispered to themselves, "It's too late now." Sentences pushed down whenever pride felt safer than honesty. Sentences buried because facing them required courage they didn't believe they had at the time. Don't mistake hesitation for uncertainty. Be clear. Hesitation often means truth is finally fighting its way out. They want to tell you they were wrong. Wrong for leaving without explaining. Wrong for choosing distance instead of communication. Wrong for assuming you would somehow understand their silence without being hurt by it. And here is the part that matters most. They are only realizing this now, not back then, not when it mattered most to you. Now. Time did what conversation should have done. It slowed them down. It removed the noise. It showed them the cost. Because you didn't need silence. You never did. You needed reassurance. You needed clarity. You needed to feel secure in what you were building together. That is not asking for too much. That is asking for care. They've replayed moments with you in their head over and over again, like scenes that refuse to fade. Your patience, the way you listened without interrupting, the way you stayed calm even when something inside you was hurting, the way you chose understanding instead of escalation. At the time, they didn't recognize it. Now they do. Now they see it clearly. You weren't demanding perfection. You weren't asking for grand gestures. You were asking for effort, consistent effort, emotional effort, presence. And the hardest realization for them is this: you gave something they didn't know how to return. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't yet know how to show it. If they call, expect pauses. Expect words that arrive slowly and imperfectly. Expect emotion they never allowed themselves to feel before. Not because they suddenly changed overnight, but because this call is not casual. This is not a check-in. This is not curiosity. This is a confession, a release, a moment where fear finally steps aside for truth. And the question that keeps them awake tonight isn't whether you will answer the phone. It's deeper than that. It's quieter. It's this: will you still recognize them now that they finally see you? Here's where perspective matters, especially for a high-value man. Don't rush to fill the silence. Don't rescue them from their discomfort. Be steady. Be grounded. Masculine energy is not about control or pressure. It is about presence. It is about being able to sit calmly in moments that feel emotionally charged without losing your center. When you can do that, you naturally attract women, not through performance, but through emotional stability. That is what creates safety. That is what creates respect. They are calling because something shifted inside them, not because they suddenly became someone new, but because time removed their illusions. Distance has a way of clarifying what closeness once obscured. When you were there, they took your consistency for granted. When you were gone, they finally felt its absence. That contrast is powerful. That is why this moment feels heavy to them. And you must understand this clearly. Recognition often arrives late, but when it arrives fully. As you listen, you may hear regret. You may hear vulnerability. You may even hear a version of them you never heard before. Don't confuse that with a promise. Don't assume that awareness automatically equals readiness. Be calm. Be observant. A high-value man doesn't react emotionally to emotional moments. He evaluates them. He listens not just to words, but to tone, pacing, and intention. He understands that attracting women long-term isn't about emotional spikes, but about emotional consistency over time. They may tell you they didn't know how to communicate back then. They may say they felt overwhelmed. They may admit they chose distance because it felt safer than facing discomfort. Let them speak. Let them finish. Silence, used well, is powerful. That is not withdrawal. That is confidence. That is masculine energy at work. You don't need to correct them. You don't need to convince them. Truth doesn't require force. What they are experiencing now is the emotional echo of choices made earlier. They are hearing themselves clearly for the first time. And whether this leads anywhere or not is secondary to what this moment represents. It represents awareness. And awareness once gained doesn't disappear, even if nothing resumes, even if paths remain separate. This call already changed them. That matters. You must also check in with yourself, not emotionally, but honestly. Ask yourself what you want now, not what you wanted back then. Don't answer from memory. Answer from the present. A high-value man doesn't live in nostalgia. He lives in clarity. He doesn't chase closure. He allows it to arrive naturally, or not at all. And because of that, he attracts women who are aligned, not confused. If you speak, speak calmly. Don't explain your past pain in detail. Don't reopen wounds unnecessarily. Be concise. Be truthful. Say what is true now, not what was true then. That distinction matters. Masculine energy communicates with precision. It doesn't over-explain. It doesn't dramatize. It doesn't seek validation. Understand this. They are calling because they finally see you. But seeing you doesn't automatically mean they are ready to meet you where you are now. And that is okay. Recognition is step 1. Readiness is step 2. Consistency is step 3. Time reveals all 3. Don't collapse them into one moment. This is how you attract women without trying. This is how you remain grounded without becoming distant. This is how a high-value man handles emotional returns from the past, with calm, with awareness, with self-respect. Be present, be steady, be honest. And above all, be aligned with who you are now, not who you were when they left. Whether this call leads to reconnection or simply closure, remember this. You were not forgotten. You were not invisible. You were felt. And being felt leaves a mark that time cannot erase. That is not power over someone else. That is personal power. That is masculine energy in its most grounded form. And if this hit you, don't scroll past it. Drop a comment right now and say, I don't wait for clarity, I live in it. Like this video, subscribe for more grounded psychological insight, and remind yourself daily, when someone finally finds the courage to speak, you decide whether they're ready to be heard. Part 3. The moment the call finally comes. Part 3 is the moment most men never prepare for, the moment the phone finally rings. And if you are still listening, understand this clearly. This message is not for everyone. It is for the man who felt something shift inside him earlier, the man who stopped chasing noise and started listening to himself. Because this connection was never ordinary and never casual. When the call finally comes, time does not behave the same way. Seconds stretch. The room feels heavier. Your chest tightens before your thoughts even form because your body knows before your logic does. There is a pause, a quiet suspended moment where everything you buried to survive starts rising without permission. When you look at the screen and see that name, the name you trained yourself not to expect anymore, your hand hesitates, not from fear but from awareness. Because answering is not about desire anymore. It is about reopening something you learned to live without. When you finally answer, there is silence. Not awkward silence, honest silence. You hear their breathing, they hear yours. And in that space, every unsaid word becomes loud. Every unresolved truth becomes present. Then their voice arrives, softer than you remember, careful, measured, like someone who finally understands the cost of leaving. They do not rush. They do not perform. They say your name slowly, as if it carries weight now, as if saying it reminds them of what they almost lost. And then something rare happens. They admit it, not with drama, not with excuses, but with clarity. They ran when things became real. They did not know how to stay. They confused distance with control and silence with strength. And here is the moment that changes everything, the moment that unsettles them more than rejection ever could. You are no longer pleading. You are not explaining yourself. You are not trying to be understood, because you have changed. And they can hear it immediately in your calm, in the way you let silence exist, in the way you no longer rush to fill space, in the way you are not asking them to choose you. Suddenly they realize this call is not about reclaiming the past. It is about facing the version of you they were never ready for. The man who built himself in absence, the man who learned discipline instead of dependency, the man shaped by old Stoic wisdom, the kind of wisdom Marcus Aurelius hinted at when he said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." And this is where modern life intersects with ancient truth. Because today, men are taught to react instantly, to chase validation, to measure worth through response time. But Stoicism win is knowing when to pause, when to listen, when not to offer yourself freely to those who once walked away. As Epictetus warned, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid, meaning real growth often looks like silence to those who do not understand it. During that call, you are not cold. You are grounded, not distant, but steady, because an iron mind does not shake when the past knocks unexpectedly. An iron mind observes, decides, and acts with intention. This is advice every man between 35 and 70 must internalize if he wants mastery over his life. Never confuse calm with indifference. Calm is power refined. Calm is experience speaking. Calm is victory without noise. As modern life grows louder with notifications, expectations, and emotional chaos, the man who can sit quietly during a moment like this controls the room without saying a word. When they sense that you no longer need them to complete you, something flips. Because need repels and self-command attracts, not as manipulation, but as natural law. Seneca said it plainly, "He who is brave is free." And freedom is exactly what they hear in your voice now. Freedom from longing, freedom from resentment, freedom from the urge to explain yourself. This is why the call feels different, because you are different. The lesson here is not about getting someone back. It is about never abandoning yourself again, about building a life so full of purpose that the past can knock without shaking your foundation. This is how you apply old Stoic wisdom in a modern world. You respond, not react. You choose presence over performance. You let people reveal who they are without interrupting them. You remember that Stoicism win is not winning arguments, but winning yourself. When the call ends, regardless of outcome, you are unchanged in your direction, because an iron mind does not hinge its future on someone else's realization. It continues forward, disciplined, steady, focused. That is the victory most people never experience. The quiet one. the one that does not need applause, the one that reshapes your entire life from the inside out. Once you understand this, truly understand it, no call, no silence, no return from the past will ever control you again. Part 4. What they realize too late. After the call ends, the silence doesn't feel empty at all. It feels weighted, like the air itself has learned something it can't unlearn. They sit there staring at the screen, not replaying your words, but replaying your tone, your steadiness, the calm that settled into your voice like it belonged there all along. That calm unsettles them more than anger ever could, because they were prepared for pain. They braced for questions, explanations, maybe even a crack in your composure. They expected you to still be waiting right where they left you, emotionally paused, holding space for a version of them that no longer existed. But you weren't there anymore. And that is when the realization lands quietly and completely. You did not stop your life when they walked away. You felt the pain fully. You cried when no one was watching. You questioned your value in the quiet moments men rarely witness. And then, without drama or announcement, you began to heal. Not quickly, not perfectly, but honestly. What they heard on that call was not distance, but growth. Not coldness, but clarity. Because the person speaking to them had learned how to stand alone without bitterness, had learned how to breathe without needing answers, had learned not to chase what did not choose them. That realization is both painful and beautiful because it forces them to confront a truth. Psychology tricks often dance around, but rarely state plainly. Strength built in silence changes everything. Emotional independence rewrites the rules of connection. Female psychology is not about manipulation or mystery, but about response to consistency, presence, and choice. Suddenly, they understand the real cost of leaving was never just losing you. It was losing the chance to grow with you, losing the version of life where love was not something visited when convenient, but something practiced daily. Love is not a mood. It is a responsibility, a steady presence, a decision renewed even when it's uncomfortable, and the truth they cannot escape that night is simple and unavoidable. You did not change because you stopped loving. You changed because you learned how to fall in love with yourself. That shift alters every dynamic, every future conversation, every possibility. When someone no longer needs validation to stand upright, their calm becomes a mirror. What others see reflected back is their own readiness or lack of it. That is why this moment lingers long after the call ends, because some lessons arrive late, stay quietly, and reshape how people understand connection, attraction, and commitment. Especially for men who are finally ready to see that how to fall in love is not about pursuit or persuasion, but about becoming someone worth choosing consistently. Psychology tricks only work on insecurity, but clarity invites respect. Female psychology responds not to pressure, but to presence. When that presence is gone, the silence teaches more than any argument ever could. That is why they want to call tonight, not to reopen the past, but because something in them recognizes that the version of you they just heard is someone they no longer have access to, someone who learned the hardest lesson without them, someone who moved forward not in anger but in strength. And that understanding, once it settles in, does not leave easily. Real growth leaves echoes. Real calm changes rooms. Real self-love changes everything, including how psychology tricks, female psychology, and how to fall in love are finally understood for what they truly are. Not tactics, not games, but reflections of emotional maturity that cannot be rushed, forced, or faked. If this message hit close to home, don't just listen, act. Like the video, share it with someone who needs this reminder, and subscribe for more clarity that cuts through the noise. Then comment below and lock the lesson in your mind. Comment to remember, I didn't lose them, I found myself, and that changed everything. Part 5. What the call changes forever. What they don't realize at first is this: the call didn't change you, it changed them. That matters more than it sounds. Because while they were sitting with the phone in their hand, debating whether to be brave enough to press call, you were already doing harder work. You were learning how to live without answers. You were learning how to wake up and move forward, even when clarity didn't arrive on time. They were measuring risk. You were building resilience. They were stuck in thought. You were learning action. And that difference, subtle at first, becomes permanent. Don't underestimate that. Be honest about it. That is where the shift begins. While they were holding tightly to pride, guarding it like a fragile possession, you were learning how to let go of hope that caused pain. Not hope in general, just the kind that keeps you waiting in the dark. The kind that whispers, maybe tomorrow, while quietly draining your energy today. You didn't become colder. You became clearer. You didn't shut down your heart. You redirected it. You learned that peace feels better than anticipation that never resolves. You learned that a high-value man does not confuse patience with self-erasure. Be steady here. You must understand this distinction if you want real growth. The truth is, the call was never meant to bring you back together. That idea belongs to the past version of you, the version that still believed effort alone could fix imbalance. The call had a different purpose. It was meant to bring clarity, clean clarity, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that settles. Clarity that you were never too much, clarity that your care was sincere, clarity that your consistency was real, and clarity that the silence you endured was not your failure. It was their hesitation, their uncertainty, their unfinished work. Don't carry what was never yours. Be precise about where responsibility ends. Standing on the other side of that conversation, something clicks. Not dramatically, quietly. You finally understand something powerful. You don't need them to choose you anymore. You already did. That realization is not loud. It doesn't announce itself, but once it arrives, it doesn't leave. This is where masculine energy changes shape. It stops being reactive. It becomes rooted. It doesn't chase confirmation. It generates stability. A man grounded in this state doesn't ask, "Do they see my worth?" He knows it. That is not arrogance. That is alignment. If they grow, you will notice, not because they say the right things, but because behavior becomes consistent. If they show up, you'll feel it without guessing. If they fight for you, it won't feel confusing. It won't feel like pressure. It won't feel like waiting. It will feel simple. And if they don't, you won't beg. You won't chase. You won't explain yourself again. Not because you're trying to prove strength, but because you've crossed a line you can't uncross. You've learned something irreversible. You've learned that attraction grows where clarity lives. You've learned how to attract women without persuasion, without performance, without tension, just presence. You now understand that love should never feel like standing in the dark, listening for footsteps that may never come. Love should feel like movement, like mutual effort, like shared direction. That is not romance theory. That is lived experience. A high-value man doesn't tolerate emotional limbo, not out of resentment, out of self-respect. Be firm here. You must protect what you've built inside yourself. The call didn't reopen your wounds. That's the part most people misunderstand. It closed them. It closed them because it showed you the contrast between who you were and who you've become. It showed you that you can be calm without control, open without attachment, interested without urgency. That balance is rare. That balance is attractive. That balance is masculine energy at its most grounded form. And once you live there, you don't go backward. Here's what matters now. You don't measure your progress by whether they return. You measure it by whether you would abandon yourself to keep them. And you wouldn't. That's the proof. That's the line crossed. That's the quiet victory no one applauds, but everyone feels. This is how a high-value man moves through life. This is how he attracts women without effort. This is how masculine energy becomes steady instead of strained. Don't romanticize the past. Be grateful for the lesson. That is the shift. You must honor what the call revealed, not what it stirred. Because what it revealed is permanent. You are no longer waiting to be chosen. You are choosing your life, and that changes everything, forever. Part 6. What the call changes forever. Part 6 is where men finally understand why silence became more powerful than words. This is not a tactic, not a trick, but a psychological law that has existed long before modern dating advice and long before smartphones trained people to talk too much and think too little. When you stopped explaining, stopped chasing clarity, stopped trying to be understood at all costs, something profound happened. Because your absence did what your effort never could. It created space, and space forces the mind to work. It forces reflection. It forces emotional recalibration, because when you are constantly present, constantly talking, constantly fixing, you remove the other person's need to think. But when you step back, when you go quiet, the brain fills the silence on its own, and it almost always fills it with questions, with memory, with comparison, with regret. Because silence is not empty. Silence is pressure. Silence is contrast. Silence is the mirror people are forced to look into when there is no longer noise to hide behind. This is why Marcus Aurelius warned, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. Because explanation weakens presence, and presence is what people feel when you are gone, not when you are begging to be heard. And in modern life, this is more relevant than ever, because we live in an age of instant replies, emotional oversharing, and constant validation loops, where everyone believes the loudest voice wins. But Old Stoic wisdom teaches the opposite. It teaches restraint, timing, and self-command. It teaches that power often moves in silence. And when you chose not to call, not to text, not to rehash the past, you unknowingly activated a psychological mechanism that confrontation never activates, because confrontation creates resistance, but silence creates curiosity, and curiosity pulls people toward the truth on their own terms. Think about it. When someone argues with you, you defend yourself. But when someone disappears with dignity, you question yourself. And that question is what changes everything, because now the story is no longer about what you said. It is about what they feel. And feelings drive action far more than logic ever will. This is why Epictetus said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." And your silence removes the illusion of control. It removes the script. It removes the predictable pattern. And suddenly you are no longer available to be dismissed. You are remembered. And memory is powerful. Memory reshapes meaning. Memory edits the past. Memory highlights what was taken for granted. And this is where regret is born, not from your speeches, but from your absence. For men between 35 and 70, this lesson is critical, because by this stage in life, you've seen that over-explaining doesn't save relationships, it drains them. You've seen that trying harder doesn't always earn respect, it often erodes it. And you've learned, sometimes painfully, that the strongest move is knowing when to stop moving at all, because silence is not withdrawal. Silence is alignment. Silence is you standing firmly in your values without demanding applause, and that is iron mind in action. That is Stoicism when lived out in real time, not as theory, but as behavior. Modern psychology confirms what old Stoic wisdom already knew, that humans assign greater value to what they must think about, not what is handed to them. And when you remove yourself, the emotional weight shifts. They begin replaying conversations, reinterpreting moments, noticing your absence in daily routines. And the mind naturally exaggerates what is missing, because loss sharpens perception. And suddenly your quiet strength speaks louder than 1,000 messages ever could. This is not about manipulation. It is about self-respect. It is about understanding that your peace matters more than winning an argument, that your time is finite, and that not everyone deserves constant access to your energy. And as Seneca wrote, "He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary," meaning you stop pre-suffering by cutting off unnecessary emotional labor. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop explaining your standards, and you let reality do the teaching. In today's world, where men are often encouraged to talk endlessly about feelings without structure or boundaries, this lesson feels almost radical. But it works because it restores balance. It restores polarity. It restores gravity. And gravity pulls things back that drift too far. Not force, not pleading, not logic, gravity. And silence is gravity. When you master this, you don't rush outcomes. You don't stalk responses. You don't measure your value by how quickly someone reacts. You measure it by how calmly you live, by how steady you remain, by how unmoved you are by chaos. And that calm is contagious. It unsettles people who expected you to chase. It forces them to recalibrate their assumptions. And sometimes, yes, it makes them want to call tonight. And when they do, what they say changes everything. Because now they are reaching out from their own conclusion, not reacting to your pressure. This is victory, quiet victory, internal victory, the kind that builds mastery over life itself. Because when you can sit in silence without anxiety, you have already won. You have won control over your impulses, over your fear of loss, over your need to be validated. And that is the foundation of Iron Mind. That is Stoicism when embodied. That is Old Stoic wisdom applied in a modern world obsessed with noise. And the advice is simple but demanding. Speak less, observe more, move only when it aligns with your values. Let silence work where words have failed. Let space do what effort could not. Trust the process that has guided disciplined men for centuries, and remember this final truth, repeated from every angle until it sinks in. Silence is not weakness. Silence is strength. Silence is choice. Silence is command. Silence is how a man who has mastered himself lets life respond on its own terms. If you're still here, you've crossed a line most men never even see. You now understand that silence is not avoidance, it is authority, and that stepping back is sometimes the exact move that shifts everything in your favor. This is the moment where effort ends and self-command begins. If this message hit you, lock it in and make it real. Go to the comments and write this sentence: I choose silence with self-respect and I trust it to do the work. Part 7. The internal conflict they're battling before dialing your number. Before they ever dial your number, a silent battle is already raging inside them. And this is the part no one sees but everyone feels. Because this moment is not about technology or timing. It is about identity, control, and the stories they tell themselves when no one is watching. They want to call tonight. That much is clear. But wanting is not the problem. Deciding is. Their mind pulls them in opposite directions at once. On one side, there is curiosity, warmth, memory, and the pull of connection that never quite faded. On the other, there is hesitation, not because they don't care, but because caring feels risky, and risk threatens the version of themselves they've worked hard to maintain. Don't assume silence means indifference. That is a mistake. Silence often means restraint, calculation, and the fear of stepping into uncertainty. Be aware of this. Making the call feels like giving something up. It feels like admitting they still feel something, and that admission alone can shake their sense of control. This is where pride enters, not as arrogance, but as self-protection. They ask themselves hard questions in the quiet. What if I call and she's distant? What if she doesn't answer? What if I reveal more than I intended? Each question tightens the knot. Their ego doesn't collapse loudly. It trembles quietly, because reaching out means opening a door that might not open back. You must understand this internal conflict is not weakness. It is psychology in motion. The same tension explored in countless psychology tricks that reveal how the mind resists vulnerability even when the heart wants connection. Anxiety creeps in disguised as logic. They tell themselves it's too late, or the timing isn't right, or waiting is smarter. That is how the mind regains a sense of control. But beneath those thoughts is a deeper fear, losing the upper hand emotionally, losing the image of being unaffected, losing the calm distance that once felt safe. This is where female psychology quietly influences the moment, not through manipulation, but through meaning, because the idea of you represents more than a person. It represents a moment where feelings were real, and real feelings demand courage. Don't underestimate how heavy that realization can be. Calling feels like surrender because it removes the shield of ambiguity. Once the call is made, things become defined. Defined things can change everything. That is why the pause is so long. That is why the phone stays face down on the table while the mind races. They are not deciding whether to call. They are deciding whether they are ready to feel again. Be clear about this. Control is comfortable, but connection is powerful, and power always asks for a price. The irony is that the very psychology tricks they've learned to stay composed now work against them, because emotional distance stops being a strategy and starts becoming a cage. This is where how to fall in love becomes less about romance and more about courage, because falling is not losing, it is choosing movement over stagnation. You must recognize that when someone battles themselves this intensely, it means the feeling is still alive. The anxiety is not about you rejecting them, it is about them confronting a part of themselves they thought was settled. They replay past conversations, analyze tone, imagine responses, and rehearse what they might say, because words matter when emotions are on the line. One sentence could reopen everything. One pause could say too much. That is why what they will say changes everything, even before it is spoken. This moment sits at the crossroads of desire and restraint, where psychology tricks, female psychology, and how to fall in love all intersect in real time, not as theories, but as lived experience. Don't rush this moment, understand it, because when the call finally comes, it will not be casual. It will be the result of a quiet decision to step forward instead of staying safe, to risk clarity instead of hiding behind silence, and to choose honesty over control. And that choice, more than the call itself, is what truly changes everything. Part 8. Why this conversation could never have happened sooner. This conversation could never have happened sooner, and that truth matters more than most men realize, because timing is not about the calendar, it is about readiness, and readiness cannot be rushed without breaking something essential. Don't confuse desire with preparedness. They are not the same. A man can want to speak, want to explain, want to reconnect, and still be completely unready to say what actually needs to be said. That is why earlier attempts would have failed. Not because the feelings were absent, but because the clarity was incomplete. Be honest with yourself here. Growth does not happen on demand. It happens in silence, in distance, in moments where nothing is said, but everything is processed. That distance was not punishment. That is psychology at work. Without space, emotions stay tangled. With space, truth rises. This is timing psychology in its purest form, and it explains why forcing communication too early only creates noise instead of understanding. Earlier, the conversation would have been fueled by reaction instead of reflection. Words would have been defensive, tone would have been rushed, meaning would have been distorted by unresolved emotion. You must understand this. When two people speak before they are emotionally ready, they are not communicating. They are protecting themselves. That is why silence was necessary. Silence allowed both sides to recalibrate. Silence allowed personal growth to occur without an audience. Silence allowed a man to rebuild his internal frame, not to impress, but to stabilize. This is where the mindset of a high-value man begins, not in performance, but in restraint. Don't chase resolution before understanding. Be patient enough to let clarity mature. Time also changes perspective, and perspective changes language. What could not be said before now has structure, weight, and intention. Earlier, the words would have sounded like uncertainty. Now they sound like choice. That difference is everything. This is why the delay was essential, not accidental, not unfortunate. Essential. Emotional readiness means being able to speak without needing a specific response to feel grounded. That is masculine energy at its healthiest, calm, intentional, and self-contained. You must see this clearly. A man who speaks too soon speaks to be validated. A man who waits speaks because he knows what he means. Distance played another critical role. It removed emotional dependency and replaced it with discernment. When distance exists, attraction either fades or clarifies. There is no middle ground. If the feeling survives distance, it returns stronger but quieter, more focused. That is why this conversation carries weight now. It is no longer driven by impulse. It is driven by recognition. This is also why attempts to attract women through urgency almost always fail. Urgency communicates need. Calm communicates value. Be calm. Be grounded. That is how a high-value man moves through emotional territory without losing himself. Earlier communication would have been tangled in expectation, Expectations create pressure. Pressure kills honesty. Now, expectation has been replaced with acceptance. Acceptance opens the door to truth. Don't overlook this shift. It is subtle, but it changes everything. When a man no longer needs a specific outcome, his words become clean. They land differently. They are heard differently. This is one of the least discussed aspects of masculine energy, yet one of the most powerful. It is not about control. It is about internal alignment, and alignment takes time. This delay also allowed identity to evolve. The man speaking now is not the man who would have spoken earlier. Experience has reshaped priorities. Reflection has sharpened intention. Growth has softened defensiveness without dulling self-respect. That is the balance most men struggle to achieve. Don't rush that balance. You must earn it through lived experience. This is why the conversation could never have happened sooner. The man was still becoming himself, and a man who is still forming cannot speak from certainty. There is also a deeper truth here. Real connection requires two people who can stand independently. Distance, forced independence. Independence restored attraction. This is not theory. This is lived psychology. When both sides step back, the emotional fog clears. What remains is either genuine interest or nothing at all. That clarity is priceless. That is how men who truly attract women operate, not through persuasion, but through presence. Be present. Be steady. Let time do its work. Now, when the conversation finally happens, it is not rushed. It is not crowded with emotion. It is deliberate. Each word has intention. Each pause has meaning. That could not have happened earlier. Earlier, the conversation would have been about fixing something. Now, it is about revealing something. That difference defines maturity. That difference defines a high-value man. Don't underestimate how rare that shift is. Timing, growth, and distance are not obstacles. They are filters. They remove what is unstable and strengthen what is real. Masculine energy thrives in this space because it does not demand immediate resolution. It allows truth to arrive when it is ready. You must trust that process. The delay was not wasted time. It was preparation. It was refinement. It was necessary. This is why the conversation carries power now. Not because of what will be said, but because of who is saying it. The truth could only surface after patience had done its work. And when truth arrives at the right time, it does not need to convince. It simply stands. Hey, my friend. Before you leave this video, I want to share a few words with you, like a friend sitting down for an honest conversation. Life has these strange moments, an old call, a familiar name, a memory that suddenly returns. And that doesn't mean you're weak, it simply means you're human, able to feel, to care, to remember. Remember this clearly, not everyone who comes back is meant to stay. Some return to apologize, some return to show us how much we've grown, and some return too late, not to hurt us, but to set us free. If someone from your past crossed your mind while listening to this, that's okay. You're allowed to remember without returning. You're allowed to feel without reopening doors that once caused you pain. My sincere advice to you is this: don't let curiosity pull you back to a place that once confused your heart. Don't let one phone call shake the peace you worked so hard to build. Peace may be quiet, but it is always right. Before you go, write this in the comments for yourself. I choose peace over confusion. If this story touched your heart, stay with me. Subscribe, because the next video might say the exact words your soul has been waiting to hear. You didn't lose them. You found yourself.